Thanks for pressing play on another Dolphins podcast. I wouldn't necessarily call today a mailbag show, but we are flipping the script. We are putting our listeners under the spotlight. We are going to dive into your thoughts on Jevon Holland, Miami's free agent plans, and why on earth are we talking about a guard at pick 13? All that is soon to come, but I can't bury the lead. I'm joined today by Joshua Houtz. What's going on, brother?
Nothing, man. I told you I was at the dentist this morning, and it feels like they took my soul out from my face. But I'm excited to be able to do this because it's nice to be able to showcase our listeners. You know, some of the comments they have about some of the things we discuss, because we say it all the time, man. Without them, we are no one. So I'm pretty stoked to do this podcast and excited to see your happy face. How have you been, Jake? How's your Monday going? It's Monday.
Monday, you nailed it, dude. Case of the Mondays, it's like Office Space. I don't think you can have a good Monday, but I'm going to kind of soak up my Sunday. You know, I set the tone for the week. I made a good breakfast. And dude, did you ever watch Wacky Races growing up?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, dude, I bought the box DVD set, so I'm going back from like the start in like 1968, just Dick Dastardly and his evil deeds. Like, dude, it has been so much fun. So that's my rant instead of talking about my Monday. That's what I'm going to focus in on. But Josh, you hit the nail on the head. Our community is what makes this so special. It makes all these conversations so much fun to have. If you would like to get engaged, involved, Josh, we're in the middle of the offseason. This is the dead time, and we are coming off a podcast. Cat's Big Board is one of our most downloaded shows yet. So thank you all so much for being involved. Thank you all so much for listening. And engage with us. You know, I have it scrolling at the bottom here. If you're watching our show, 560 WQAM YouTube channel, you can find us there. iTunes, Spotify, podcasts, wherever you get them. Another Dolphins podcast, you can find us, our socials. Reach out to us if you can't find it. We love to interact with you guys. All right, Josh, are you ready? Are you ready to dive into some questions?
Yeah, man. I mean, you got me hyped. Let's do it.
All right, I want to start. Oh, boy, the formatting is going to be a little wonky here, so bear with us. We're going to have a little fun here. And shout out Mick Rack right off the top. He is always commenting on our YouTube shows, so we appreciate him. He said, I never understood the Dion Jordan pick. He was a pass rush specialist in college. He didn't even play 3-down series, but I don't understand many of the Dolphins drafts. I was looking through 1982 through 1997 the other day to remember the later Shula, and those drafts were garbage after Marino. It's easy to see why we sucked for so long, and Ross lost us 2 draft picks, a first and a third. The dead cap is more savings than is with Fuller. So, Josh, this was back a couple days ago or a week ago when we really started digging into some draft stuff. Dion Jordan was on the Fish Tank podcast and kind of talking about his career. But, man, the point I thought that was really interesting here is talking about how the Dolphins, a team that had great success under Don Shula and Dan Marino, still struggled with that consistency. And it just kills me that this is the same issues we're having today.
Yeah, I mean, time is a flat circle, right? It seems like we're never out of this. And I try not to be, this pessimist, but when you think about Don Shula and Dan Marino not being able to get something done, I mean, it makes you almost feel
Chris Greer.
Yeah, and now you have Chris Greer. I mean, I don't know that any of us really thought, Dion Jordan was going to be that pick when they moved up. Eric Fisher was there. Who was the other one? I knew it on the last pod, but
the Chiefs tackle, right? Luke Fisher.
Yeah, and Lane Johnson was also there, I believe. So they could have went up there and got an offensive lineman. A lot of people felt really high on Dion Jordan. Obviously, it never worked out for the Dolphins, but I still am okay with the trade because, they had conviction. They moved up there. They took a swing, and unfortunately they missed. But to hear, just how no matter if it was Shula and then everything that came after, it still seems like the drafts are the key problem. And you have to be so upset with Stephen Ross, man. I still cannot believe that dude cost us all those picks just to flirt and swing and miss with Tom Brady and Sean Payton, and the list goes on and on.
Was there, this is a tough question, Josh. Do you remember any of those Shula drafts that you were maybe like enamored with at the time? I mean, dude, like we were just talking about Jonathan Martin and everything that came out that recently. I remember this was just when I was really getting into being a Dolphin content creator, like Ryan Tannehill in the first round, Olivier Vernon. He got a monster contract from the Giants after he left Miami. I think he even went to Cleveland as well. Remember the Michael Ignus saga, but then you had Lamar Miller, who was a starter. And then you also had Rashard Matthews as a 7th round pick. So before we kind of talk about some of the newer drafts, do you remember any from those later Shula days where you could kind of think that, wow, this would really be one that we'd have talked a lot about on Dolphins Twitter, just for the different personalities or perspectives some of the traits or some of the players brought?
No, I'm going to be honest. The older I get, the more I realize that, I was a peasant. I was a peasant living in Pennsylvania, and I'm sitting here trying to think of like all the great Dan Marino memories I remember watching on TV. And I'm like, the one that sticks out the most is when Stoyanovich shanked that field goal in the playoffs, and that was the closest I've ever seen him get. So I barely even remember the good days of Dan Marino and Don Shula. So I cannot remember a single draft to save my life. But I did look it up, man. He had 1984 through 1997, 1983, the Dan Marino draft. I mean, they got Marino, Mark Clayton, Mike Charles, Charles Benson, Reggie Robbie, Anthony Carter, a lot of guys who, I admittedly do not know who they are, but they played 9+ seasons. I mean, that was a solid draft there. You just wonder if almost, okay, we got Dan Marino, and the drafts from there just kind of went downhill. So that was my long-winded way of saying, no, Jake, I don't remember any of those.
And that's kind of a statement in itself, right? Like there's nothing memorable about them. Moving on, shout out for a great name here. We got Richie Butts, who basically kind of summed up every single podcast we're doing over the next couple months. Every year we do the same thing. We look at the Dolphins as a healthy whole, and we think that they're a formidable team, and all they have to do is tweak the roster a little bit. And then it happens. Key players get injured, and once again, they are playing thin and lacking to be competitive against better teams in the NFL. This has been Chris Grier's legacy. Some of it has just been bad luck, but most of it is his willingness to roll the dice on players who have a history of struggling to stay on the field. I'll never be optimistic until he's gone. Josh, I think this is one of my favorite talking points of the offseason. Not that being a Dolphins fan comes with all this doom, gloom, and misery, but we know Chris Grier's traits. We know that he kind of likes to flex seal on everything, right? Anytime there's a little leak springing, we'll get a Kendall Fuller, we'll fill that right up. Jordan Brooks, and we see it work sometimes. We see it work. And then we have guys like Jordan Poyer where it flat out doesn't work. And so I love what Richie is saying here, because I am praying, Josh, that this is the offseason Miami does something a little different. And it goes back to what I've said a couple times here. Instead of trying to shore up every position group, have one or two groups, 3 even, dare you, that are just elite, that are just so incredibly elite and full of depth. Like, stop trying to smite some positions that you are so stout at just to maybe be safe at guard, because we see what safe is. All it takes is one person to get hurt, and all of a sudden your entire plan is gone. So Josh, I think that's where I want the Dolphins to really focus in this year, is not only to understand its strengths and weaknesses, but for once in the Chris Grier era, just embrace them, understand them.
Yeah, I mean, and you want to, and you want to sit here and be able to say, like he said, I'll never be optimistic until he's gone. And I mean, how many of us feel that way, right? We're sitting here. It's like that icebreaker game. Is that not the one with the Penguins where like the ice keeps I don't know, you put the marbles or whatever, and eventually it just breaks. I think it's called icebreaker, dude. I'm old as heck.
Wasn't there one with a hammer? You made a
that might have been it.
And then you smash one out at a time.
Yeah, icebreakers. I'm talking about a gum. So either way, it feels like we're at the point where it's just gonna break. And I hope that Chris Grier and Mike McDaniel both have learned from their past mistakes. I mean, they've admitted that they didn't put as much stock into the interior offensive line. I mean, they have to build there. You mentioned, kind of hoping you could put the flex seal on with Jordan Poyer. I mean, that never worked out. And now you don't have Jevon Holland either. So intrigued to see what Chris Grier does, because he's on his last, if he's a cat man, he's on his 9th life. He has to figure this out or he's gone.
Billy Batson, another dude who comments quite a bit. We appreciate your contributions, and he laid out his entire offseason blueprint, so I just figured I'd share it with you guys. I'm bringing back the linebackers. Tyrell Dodson's probably the big one here who's about to be a free agent. His story, for the Dolphins was so unique, and just his 2024 season was so very unique. He says he's also going to utilize free agency and draft to upgrade the position even more. He is signing Liam Eichenberg and Robert Jones for $3 million, $4 million tops. We might have to just punt him out of the room right there, Josh, for wanting to give Liam Eichenberg money.
Yeah, I was sitting here looking at the drafts, and I had written down, was it 2020, one of the drafts. I'm sitting there, and I'm like, oh, this is a pretty nice class. And I was like, oh, there's Liam Eichenberg, man. So, if you can get him cheap, I could see why you would maybe want him as your Jesse Davis 6th man. But come on, man. I'm good with punting him in straight to the moon. Paluski or what does he, Pumplusi, whatever his Twitter is, his little burner.
I'm going to butcher the name here, but he also added that Cam Scadaboo would be awesome on the Dolphins. I would draft Ashton Genty at 13 and then Scadaboo in the 2nd or 3rd round. Holy moly, what a unique draft strategy here. We need an offense that keeps our defense off the field. And when they do come off the field, their 3-and-out success rate should be really high. Championship winning football formula was running the football. Tua needs a strong and physical run game to make the Tuaneers proud. I think what's less realistic, giving Liam Eichenberg millions of dollars or drafting 2 running backs in the first 3 rounds?
The 2 running backs, right? There's no way they can do that. But I mean, I understand the, being enamored by him. Ashton Genty will not be doing the combine workouts. I don't know if anybody saw that. That was kind of newsworthy today. But Scadby, man, that's a guy who's like, a lot of people, think he can be a Swiss Army knife. So I could see why you'd bring him in, especially when you have issues on short yardage. But yeah, I think Liam is probably more likely than 2 running backs, right, Jake? I mean, they'll definitely bring an Acorn in, but drafting one at 13 and then drafting one, yeah, I can't see it.
There was a chart going around. I think it was Nate Tice, who works for Yahoo Sports, and it was just talking about how over the last 15 years, just how many drives you see per game, and just basically how many times each offense is on the field. And we're starting to see fewer and fewer drives. And what that means is this Dolphins offense we've seen the last couple of years, where Tua's been near the top of the league in yards per attempt. Defenses are strongly playing against that type of football, right? They want you to go 7 yards at a time. And when you're an offense that can hit those home runs, and you're hitting those home runs in order to kind of sweep some other mistakes under the rug, right, Josh? Even when the Dolphins offensive line was a little bit stronger, 2023, they were leading the league in yards per attempt. Raheem Mostert leading the league in yards, touchdown runs. You were able to sweep, they had so many big plays. You were able to sweep maybe a fumbled snap under the rug. You were able to sweep a false start under the rug. The NFL is making it, and defenses are making it, where you can't sweep that stuff under the rug anymore, where you can't just, a 40 ball to Tyreek Hill doesn't, get rid of a. Josh, what was the Ravens game, the Jalen Waddle touchdown? It was 3rd and 22 or something insane. No, it was that Bills game where he caught it over the middle, 3rd and 22 and down inside the 10-yard line. The defenses are getting so much better at trying to figure those things out. So I didn't share Billy's comment here to roast it. I really love the unique thinking, and I genuinely understand the Dolphins are at a point where you need to reassess everything. You need to figure out an offense that works for today's NFL. That sounds crazy just 2 years ago, how quickly things change. But Josh, when I look at Miami's success running the football, I think it starts with just really hammering home some offensive linemen. I'd love Genty in this offense. I'd love another playmaker out of the backfield. But man, you just spent a 3rd-round pick on Jalen Wright. You got to just put your guys in a situation to succeed before you go out and say that a running back is the last thing missing.
Yeah, and sometimes it almost seems like Mike McDaniel and just the play calling at times seems almost too cute. And I think that's kind of what I do. I mean, we do agree, right? We want to see this more physical, ground and pound type team. I mean, it's more than just, wanting to be effective in short yardage or wanting to, grind out the clock late in games. It's almost a mindset. I mean, you see, they're trying to ban the tush push. I mean, because the Philadelphia Eagles can just line up and say, okay, we want a yard, we're going to get that yard. I mean, you want to see the Dolphins be able to do that. And I do think, if you invest in the offensive line, as nice as Ashton Genty would be, I mean, you're right, man. They just traded up for Jalen Wright because they thought he was special enough to move up there. You have Devon Achane who can do everything. You just don't know how much of a workload you want to give him. But and not to mention what this would do for Tua. So I'm all for investing in the offensive line, investing in the run game. But if Mike McDaniel's first few seasons have told us anything, it's that he's not going to do that, right? And this is the run game coordinator. And when you got Jalen Waddle and potentially Tyreek Hill, I mean, that kind of straps your play calling as well.
Dude, I'm so happy you said that. Isn't it so crazy? We are in a league where we witnessed this offense put up 70 points. And instead, the talk of the town isn't a 80-yard touchdown play or an unstoppable deep ball. It's a 1-yard run. That's that is crazy to me, just kind of the evolution. And I think that idea in itself kind of speaks to the point we're making. So shout out, Billy. We appreciate the contributions and keep up with these unique perspectives, man. We love them and it helps make us show better. It really gets our hamster wheel moving to really think about these things. So thank you. Going on to Mark Fowler. Number 1 QB, top priority. We can't throw away a season because Tua gets hurt. Trade down, get QB with pick number 1, or if you don't trade down to get the first round, a QB in the second round, unless Dart or Milrow are gone. If so, get Ewers or QB in the 3rd or 4th round if Ewers is gone. There are other QBs good. There are other good QB we can get after that, but to me, our budget Our budget biggest priority is QB because of Tua's injury history, and second priority is the O-line. Sorry, I should have kind of wrote that a little better to read it. But Josh, I understand the point. A massive issue for the Miami Dolphins last season was the inabilities of the backup quarterbacks. I still can't believe there was a game where Skylar Thompson came in for one play, fumbled the ball, and had to be taken out of the game because there was all of a sudden a fear that and this is your quarterback, your injury-prone quarterback had to come into. That was because your fear of losing the game. I understand the need for a quarterback. My only issue here, man, if you're drafting a quarterback first overall, if you're drafting a quarterback in the 3rd round, you could argue that you're not throwing away the season, but you're preparing yourself to deal with some rookie mistakes. And I don't think the Dolphins are in a spot to deal with rookie mistakes. So while I see quarterback as a massive need, a huge weakness for the Dolphins, specifically the backup quarterback, I don't think this regime can value. And I mean, you think about how high quarterbacks go every year. They can't invest that type of value into a backup who's going to make mistakes when they come into the game. That's just the way the quarterback position is. Josh, just to kind of throw one of the wolves here, we have heard Adam Schefter link Marcus Mariota to the Dolphins as one possible backup.
Yeah, I mean, I can see what he's saying. I mean, if there was the potential to maybe trade up and get a Cam Ward and, handcuff him and not let him leave Hard Rock Stadium, I mean, maybe in the the fantasy world, the Dolphins could do that, but I just don't see it. So I do think they'll go the veteran route. I think, like you mentioned, Marcus Mariota has been linked to him. I think him and Tua Tagovailoa have some sort of connection from earlier in their career. And it was funny because I think Andy Dalton was also another name, but he re-signed with the Carolina Panthers. So, I mean, for me, Marcus Mariota, Andy Dalton, I mean, I think about it. Are they going to save the Dolphins season? But last year, we probably only needed, one win to get into the playoffs? So I don't know what the Dolphins will do. I'm preparing myself for, Jimmy Garoppolo or something like that. But I don't think they're going to trade up and invest the future in a young rookie quarterback. And I don't know that they can, right? If you get Cam Ward, what's that do for Chris Greer and Mike McDaniel? If you go out there and go, 6-11 or whatever, I mean, you're still probably fired. So the Dolphins are in the here and now. They got to bring in a veteran that has experience winning in the NFL, and I think that's what they'll do. But I would have no issue with a Milroe in round 2. I think Dart could be the Willy Wonka ticket, though. If he falls to 13 and you have a team that's begging to get him, I mean, let him trade up and we'll move back 5 spots for an additional 2nd or 3rd or whatever, and then you can keep building for the now.
I haven't been on the anti-Mike McDaniel bandwagon, but Josh, one of the things that's really let me down about his tenure as coach is the backup quarterback position. Like, you took Skylar Thompson, somebody who has these traits, who had these traits in college of being a mobile quarterback, somebody who used their legs quite a bit. And all of a sudden, they did none of that. And he looked helpless out there. And Josh, if the Dolphins had Cooper Rush, an undrafted free agent of the 2017 draft, that is kind of the type of player I thought Mike McDaniel might be able to identify. He hit the home run with the 3rd round Swiss Army knife, all tier, all pro type playmaker in Devon Achane. But I thought another thing he'd be able to identify, especially it took 2 weeks in Miami before he watched Tua film, and there was this huge outcry about how he knew that Tua was the perfect quarterback for his system and he can do X, Y, and Z, and I love this trait, that trait, another thing. And then you got Skylar Thompson. That to me is just so head scratching when you can, this is a position, you could spend a 7th round pick on a quarterback every year and you're not hurting your team whatsoever. So that has always bothered me. We can invest a 2nd, 3rd round pick on another quarterback, sure. But part of having Mike McDaniel as your coach, one of his strengths as the QB guru was to have somebody in place, not to be an elite backup and go make their own payday, but just somebody who can come in and be above water, not look like they're drowning. Is that too much to ask?
No, and I think he wasn't in on the Teddy Bridgewater. Didn't he say that was the exact backup we wanted? I mean, no disrespect Teddy Bridgewater, but I mean, he didn't do anything for Miami. And I think Mike White as well. I mean, so you're right, man. Those were the quarterbacks that he brought in to, alleviate some of the pain that's going to come with Tua Tagovailoa missing games. And he swung and missed. So again, last chance, man. You got to find somebody, but throwing a dart at any rookie every year. I mean, the Dolphins should be doing that every year at this point. Every team should be. I mean, they should be fighting for some of these backup guys that, with the right coaching development could turn into something. We
got a double up here from Patriot Dave. and also Dion Cooper. Basically, the idea is talking about Jevon Holland. Josh, we did a Jevon Holland podcast recently, and he's been on his own podcast that he hosts with Cam Wolf. Shout out Cam Wolf, who's absolutely incredible at his job over at NFL Network. Just kind of talking about how he's ready to embrace free agency and he's ready to move on and turn the page and all those different things. And that, I think, has Dolphin fans salty a little bit, where they don't really remember just how great Jevon Holland has been. Like, don't get me wrong, 2024 was brutal, but up until he suffered that injury against the Jets last year, he was an all-pro type player. He was lining up all over the field. 362 snaps at free safety, 211 in the box, 121 at slot corner. Just 6 missed tackles, an interception, 3 forced fumbles. And Josh, he had that forced fumble in week 1, Travis Etienne, that really sealed Miami's win against Jacksonville. God, I'd hate to imagine what the season looked like if Miami was to lose that game. But his 2024 numbers, he's taken a step back. He's learning a new defense. And I'm not saying this to defend him, but I think when we say, forget about Jevon Holland, we're forgetting that this is somebody who made us forget about a first-team All-Pro and Minkah Fitzpatrick. Like, Jevon Holland was a stud for a couple of years, and I'd argue that injuries did play a role, and, outside conversations and different perspectives people have on the situation have impacted it. I know that's very broad, but I don't know, man. Jevon has always been one to kind of share his thoughts and share his perspective. Fans are in that same boat, and I guess the simplest way to kind of boil it down is the truth from both sides is somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, it always is. I mean, you can understand why both sides. I mean, the Dolphins almost have to let him go, right? It's almost the Christian Wilkins thing all over again. I love how you said he made us forget out Minkah, because it almost felt, I forget who I was talking to on Blue Sky, but I was like, this almost feels exactly like the Minkah situation again, right? The 24-year-old guy, he's going to get, everyone's going to be, most teams are going to be trying to court him in free agency, and his best football's ahead of him. So it is funny that you mentioned, Jake, the different coordinators, and we'll look at Tua Tagovailoa, and people list that throughout, everything he's overcome. Six offense, whatever it was, at one point from college to the pros, but they'll overlook, Jevon Holland, the same thing, and the injuries and things like that. I mean, it takes time to recover from that. I think Jevon Holland will be just fine, but I do think both sides are ready to part ways, and I don't know if you saw it, but well, he was sitting there saying how he felt kind of snubbed that he wasn't part of the Valentine's Day cards, because he feels like on social media they're not showing him anymore, and that's kind of the Dolphins' way of saying they moved on. And you can't really argue that, right? I mean, that probably is their way of saying, we're going our separate directions.
Bro, kids these days, they everything gets so personal. 2 weeks before this, he was talking about how he's excited to go out in free agency on his own. Like, this is a two-way street, man.
They took each other out of their MySpace top 6 or whatever. They removed each other from their friends list.
Exactly. It's definitely not a one-sided thing. They both completely pushed them out of their top 6, their top 8, even their top 53. It even seems
no longer in a relationship or whatever the stat wasn't that. That's hilarious. We wish him all the luck, though, right?
Oh, 100%. But it's important to say here, Jevon's never been loudly campaigning for the Miami Dolphins, right? He's always been I'm played it cool. It is what it is. And to come out here and be the emotional or share that emotional side, not that it's bad, it's just weird, because for the last couple weeks, you were in the spot where you're like, oh, I can't wait. This is going to be generational money and it's a business. And all of a sudden it's not a business. It's just a very weird mindset. But this is somebody who's 24 years old, a former second-round pick, very versatile. He's going to make an absolute boatload of money, and I just hope he's out of the AFC East. I am very worried with the Patriots having $130 million in cap space. I'd argue that's almost too much cap space, but man, oh man, that at least twice a year that Jevon Holland would be playing on his hair with his hair on fire.
And that'd be Mike Vrabel. I mean, that's terrifying, knowing what the Dolphins do against Mike Vrabel. Someone needs to look into the Pats. All that money they have to. There has to be a Spygate or something we can get them with, right? Remove some of that cap space or take some of their picks, please.
Dude, they have that Jaws music. They're coming up quickly. Moving on to Jose here. He said, I would trade down and get as many picks as possible you can within the top 100. If Tyreek can be moved, swap the 13th or the 8th with the Lions and the Vikings and take their late first and possibly an extra second or third. I don't know what he meant by the 8th, so I'm just going to say swap the 13th with the Lions or Vikings, take their late first and possibly an extra second or third for it. Josh, this has been a very, very strong sentiment from most of our fans. The idea of the Dolphins have so many holes, they should trade down. They need as many picks as they can get. The only issue with that, this isn't a rebuilding team. This is a team that needs to win now. And if you go back to the Chop Robinson pick, man, Chris Greer was raving about these trades and how you don't get someone this fast coming off the edge this late in the draft that often. I just wonder if Chris Greer can ignore the top end trades that you only see in the top 15 picks of the NFL draft. I understand everybody. And there's a huge group of people who are saying, especially if you're going to add to the offensive line, especially if you're going to add a guard, you're not doing it at pick 13. And I buy that. I understand what they're saying. But until Miami doesn't do it, I still think it's a genuine option we should consider.
Yeah, this is almost like a double-edged sword, right? I mean, for as much as you'd love to trade down and acquire those picks, like you mentioned, Jake, I still believe that, there's going to be a player that's high up on their draft where they're just going to fall right into their lap. And if for some reason that doesn't, and a team comes calling, yeah, sure, trade down if you can. Malachi Starks is a name, Kenneth Grant. There's players that we just talked about with Cat that, could get you hyped. But I do think the Dolphins, in the moment they're in, knowing what Chris Greer does with the flex seal, they're going to go into this hoping to get best player available. I mean, what's going to be most intriguing is what happens if it is Ashton Genty just staring right there in the face. Are they going to invest the 13th overall pick on a running back? Tyler Warren could be there too. I mean, very interesting thing. But I think the Dolphins, as of now, are probably going to stay put, right? Again, because an elite player is going to fall right into their lap.
I'm still holding out hope, maybe like a trade up on draft day. Let's get real spicy.
We said about Tyreek moving up to get, I mean, Ted McMillan would be that big-bodied receiver. You never know. There could be, I don't know, man.
Panthers at 8, man. Rob Hunt's already doing us a little service by saying, "Hey, Tyreek, come join the Panthers." So we'll have to see. This one I liked a lot, and I'm apologizing right here. Supermore said, "This team needs to trade down for God's sake. It has too many holes to fill with cheap talent. We should not even be thinking about picking at 13. Trade down and get more picks. I'd trade out of the first round totally." Josh, I mean, it's kind of the same song and dance at this point. You can't say no to improving this roster. And when you have limited cap space, your best option outside of like trading your entire future away to get a top tier prospect is to hold on to that pick. I understand it, but I mean, God, I don't know if you trust going out there with a fourth. Like if this scenario happens, I mean, you might be going out there with a 4th round rookie starting at guard opening day or starting at safety opening day. There's nothing wrong with that on the surface, but that depth would be looking very ugly.
Yeah, it would. And I mean, I understand the sentiment, right? I mean, you're going to we think we're going to be strapped with the salary cap and things like that. I mean, you do need those extra picks and or at least need to hit on some of them, but I don't think they can afford to trade all the way out of the first round entirely. And like I just said to the last one, I don't even know if they can afford to move out of 13. You just kind of hope there is a run on maybe quarterbacks or, an Ashton Genty goes and pushes a defensive guy down, whatever it may be. But yeah, trading completely out of the first round, I can't see that.
Another one, I apologize if I butcher the name, but Model Sky Auto Detailing, excuse me. I mean, this is a top tier comment right here. If it were any other year, I'd take guys like Jalen Walker or Malachi Starks, could be in the conversation, but the needs on the offensive line and defensive line come first, and they've got players who are good enough to be drafted at 13 on both lines. Josh, I think this is them saying that the Miami Dolphins just have to take their medicine. You've ignored the defensive line for so long. You've ignored the offensive line for so long. If this is another year, you could pick the Ferrari like Walker or something like that. But the Dolphins, when I was a kid, we used to have 2 of the big speakers, man. They must have been like 5 feet tall on each side of our TV. And whenever I was sick, my mom would pick me up and sit me on one of the speakers in order for me to take medicine because, oh, dude, that was the worst tasting grape in the entire world. I think the Dolphins we need to place them on top of the speaker and just give them the great medicine that is an offensive lineman. And I completely agree with this.
Yeah, I mean, it's not this. I mean, it might not be the sexiest picks, but I think you get to an age where you realize that you got to build the interior. I mean, like you mentioned, we just saw it in the Super Bowl, right? How important it was for the defensive line of the Philadelphia Eagles, for that offensive line. I mean, you can do things that the Dolphins right now can't when you build there. So, I mean, Kenneth Grant, I fell in love with him because I thought Cat was going to name him on the last pod. Went and watched him. So that's a name. I mean, there's pass rushers that we mentioned and the offensive lineman, man. I mean, you have all these tackles that Cat mentioned on the last pod that, the Dolphins could go in that direction. Yeah, sit them down on that and make them taste that grape medicine that you're talking about, Jake. It's awful. What about that pink? Do you like the pink one though, right? The pink one's really good, like amoxicillin or something. Is that what it is?
Pepto-Bismol, like that stuff always, they figured out
chalky stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Wow, look at us, dude. This is February content if I've ever seen it. A 3-parter here. We got Billy coming back here. I just thought this was a fun one. So the idea here that Mike McDaniel has lost the locker room. We had Billy saying that my way of letting a fire under any player is drafting their replacement. On my team, starters better keep the backup players on the bench because them boys hungry and are pushing for playing time. Josh, yeah, I buy this. One of the biggest gripes of the Ryan Tannehill era is that he never had a backup quarterback to push him. You have 2 wide receivers here in Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle who haven't necessarily been pushed. You're cutting more backup wide receivers than you are signing them. I think Billy makes a great point here, and I think this is one of Miami's biggest weaknesses, and I think a big part of that is you've had to trade the draft picks, and it's hurt your depth as a result, and you've traded your depth picks for people who haven't necessarily lived up to a specific standard.
Yeah, that's pain. We got to do it. I mean, it almost feels like the Dolphins at their country club. They don't want to hurt feelings at times, right? I mean, and it's at times they invest in them, but I mean, there's no reason why the Dolphins should be trotting some of those offensive linemen out there that we've seen in the past. And like you mentioned, man, the backup position is absolutely brutal. So bring in anybody at different positions, light that fire under their butt. I absolutely love that. So, Billy, you nailed it, man. Let's figure out a way to get that to Mike McDaniel. TNT wall if we have to.
What do you mean Duke Riley isn't letting, as a backup for an 8th straight season, isn't letting a fire? What do you mean?
Mr. Light a fire under someone's ass. Please. I don't have much time.
Mr. Majestic made me laugh here when he just said, you guys need some detox. That was us ranting about the Tyreek Hill drama. And I mean, hey, we're going to give you that energy. We're going to give you that passion 12 months a year. That's what makes Another Dolphins podcast, Another Dolphins podcast. But Mr. Majestic, you are right. Detoxing from the Miami Dolphins would probably do a lot for our psyche. And then finally here from Mr. Yearly, I'm not going to try to read everything. Please let us keep Weaver for 1 more year so that we can get a 3rd round draft pick for him. This is when he was still in contention for the Saints job. But Josh, I thought this would be just a good minute to kind of sit here and celebrate the first time in the Mike McDaniel era. He's going to have a defensive coordinator for a 2nd straight season. Shout out continuity. And I mean, Yearly hit the nail on the head here. The Dolphins are expected to keep Weaver for 1 more year. That means if he was to go and get a head coaching job elsewhere after the season, Miami would be in line for a couple 3rd-round compensatory picks. Yeah,
and I mean, for as much as we, at least that I wanted to downplay and didn't think he might have been a legit contender this offseason, it seems like teams really love him. So, I mean, if the thing doesn't happen in the midseason that some of us speculate and he doesn't get promoted for whatever reason, and then, maybe he's the long-term answer here, the Dolphins will get a 3rd-round draft pick. And it's nice to have that continuity, right? Because we're talking about Jevon Holland and some of, his growing pains. And, it had to affect some of these other players. I mean, to have Anthony Weaver, a guy who, is well-respected, the defense looked solid this year, and you can see the potential if they're fully healthy. It's nice to have him back out there, and nice to have him as a Miami Dolphin because he had some opportunities elsewhere, and he didn't even have to come here to begin with, if we're being honest.
Josh, I wanted to spend a couple minutes here talking about the NFL salary cap. So ESPN's Dan Graziano reported that the salary cap for 2025 is projected to be in the range of $277.5 million to $281.5 million. Josh, and that comes on the heels of a $30 million increase last season. The cap is again going to be rising anywhere between $22 million to $26 million. Miami began the offseason projected to be $12 million over the salary cap. They cut Raheem Mostert, Kendall Fuller, and Durham Smythe. Suddenly, with the jump, they now have $1.5 million in available cap space. Josh, is it just a coincidence that the Miami Dolphins are somehow cap compliant about 3 weeks from the league year starting? Or is this just a sign that the Dolphins front office really knows their stuff when it comes to this money?
First off, you absolutely nailed that. Getting those numbers right, and that was perfect, man. But I think it's, we hear that, Dan Graziano, Griziano. I don't know. Dan G said, if he knows what it is, these teams have to have an idea, right? I mean, Don Aponte maybe, told Stephen Ross, her buddy, what it might go up to, whatever it might be. These teams probably know what it was going up to. So I don't think there's any coincidence at all. And I think it's kind of funny that they're like right underneath there, even though we know so many other moves are going to have to be made.
So what was it last year, Josh? The Dolphins began the offseason like $50 million over the salary cap. And there were some moves to be made. They freed up money by extending Tua. They freed up money by extending Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill extension. And then you got like $30 million on top of it. So it really isn't a good sign for the people who think the salary cap is real here, does it?
No, and that's always been speculated, right? I mean, I admit that I'm not, I don't know all the intricacies of it, but I mean, it always seems like whenever a team needs to get underneath there, they're in cap hell, they find a way. I mean, weren't the Broncos in cap hell? What'd they do this year? They got pretty far. I mean, teams are in cap hell, they seem to overcome it, and they always get underneath that number. And with teams and these TV deals, isn't it supposed to jump up again in like 2028 or something? I mean, it's just wild, man, how some of these contracts may be, front backloaded to, for this jump and just how these teams are going to ultimately, bring things together.
Dude, the salary cap has jumped like $80 million in 10 years. It's absolutely insane to me. And we haven't gotten a single mil. It's what on earth is going on here? I cannot believe it. But a way that teams are starting to manipulate the salary cap and what makes it feel a little fake is the use of void years, Josh. And basically what you're doing here is you're spreading a signing bonus over multiple years. And that way you're creating short team cap relief, but you're kind of setting up a ticking time bomb. So what you can do is you can set that signing bonus spread over multiple years to kind of clean up your salary cap. But what happens, Josh, is that let's say you have someone on the books for 4 void years at $1 million each. So it's $4 million spread up over 4 years to kind of make the money make sense. And then let's say you decide to cut that player. So the Shaq Barrett situation. Let's say the Dolphins had Shaq Barrett lined up with 4 void years. The unique thing about void years is that they all come due the second a player is no longer on the team. So if the Dolphins, let's say, owed Shaq Barrett $1 million for each of the next 4 years, the second they release Shaq Barrett, they owe $4 million. So there is this type of like ticking time bomb out there in the future. Dude, I was looking at the Philadelphia Eagles void year chart. They have Jalen Hurts having void years out until 2035. AJ Brown, Devonta Smith, and I believe someone else along with Hurts are there in 2030, which is like 5 years from now. It's absolutely insane to me, but it's a way to make the cap work a little better. And when you combine this, Josh, yes, you're pushing the snowball further down, but this money isn't accruing interest. It's actually doing the opposite. And I am the opposite of a smart money guy. So please, somebody call me out if I'm not making sense here. But it's not like when you have $5,000 on a credit card and you get interest on that. So all of a sudden you have to pay an extra $100, whatever it may be a month. Instead, with the salary cap getting bigger and bigger, that $1 million hit, which it's more of like a $4 million hit further down the road, it's not going to hurt you as much because all of a sudden the cap is growing so much that investment you took out on future dollars, all of a sudden the dollar isn't worth as much. So you're kind of manipulating it to do you a little bit of a favor here.
My God, you did the Lord's work, man, figuring that out. I mean, yeah, bravo to you, man. I just kind of learned something in this situation. And it's interesting to know that these teams, like the Philadelphia Eagles, like some of those other teams that are having success, are utilizing these void years. I mean, we saw it with the Dolphins. To hear now that it is, a ticking time bomb, you wonder how much Chris Greer is going to utilize that this season, right? I mean, we've seen it before. So thank you for educating us on void year, Jake, because I always say the salary cap's above my pay grade or my knowledge, and my God, man, figuring out those void years, that's crazy.
Yeah, so the Dolphins currently rank 7th in total void year spending due to Tua Tagovailoa, Jalen Ramsey, Jalen Waddle, and Tyreek Hill. And Josh, I think Jalen Ramsey said it best. Remember when they restructured his contract and a bunch of people were tweeting at Ramsey like, "Oh, thank you, Jalen. Thank you so much for making this work." And he just goes, "Bro, I'm still getting all my money. Don't you worry."
It was so good.
That kind of just sums it up. Oh, dude, it just really sums it up. And I think Joe Burrow was even talking on Part of My Take. Like, players are so aware of this too, where he's like, well, you could restructure this to a signing bonus, and that's how we could get T. Higgins under contract. And then Burrow even said something like the Bengals haven't manipulated money like this in the last 10 years. So, like, this is something teams should be doing. Like, if you're not doing this, you're just wasting money in a sense here by not taking advantage of these future years. Josh, there was a point where I'm like, when they signed Shaq Barrett and the cap hit was like $3 million and there was like 2 void years of $1.2 million each, I kind of started to get like, oh God, like that's not a lot of money, like in terms of the salary cap, but it's going to add up. Like if you do this for 7-8 players, that's $8 million. And then you see the cap just going up and up and up, and all of a sudden you're like, okay, $8 million. Who cares? Like you, not who cares, but like you can understand like what they're thinking and how they got to this point and how it's not going to hurt them too badly once the cap continues to go up and up and up, because the NFL, dude, is just a monster. It's just a massive monster.
Yeah, and it is. I mean, we see it. We got to get like 10 different apps just to watch all the games if we want to. I mean, they're absolutely, the king of kings, right, when it comes to sports. I do find it interesting that you mentioned Tagovailoa, Ramsey, Waddle, Hill. Those guys are, some of Miami's biggest names. So it'll be interesting to see if they utilize them anymore. If Chris Griffin gets a go ahead to utilize them anymore, right? I mean, because these guys, again, their future isn't. Their future is bleak at this point of the year, based on what we know heading into the year. So void years, man, I'm intrigued to see what we find out from it and how it affects the Dolphins moving forward. But you mentioned it, man, the cap space, it's peanuts to some of these NFL teams, especially if it just keeps going up.
If a franchise is smart and has the foresight, it's really easy to kind of prepare for these things. But I'm really interested to see what's going to result in this in the next couple of years, Josh. Like, it's really easy to see everything cut clean right now, but there are going to be scenarios that rise up where maybe a team miscounted or a player they have to release or move on from for reason X, Y, and Z, and a bunch of money just comes out of nowhere onto the salary cap. So this is going to be interesting. It's still a learning experience. And I think that's what makes it so fun. And I think that's why NFL is king right now, man. They turned the NFL salary cap into something that we can kind of follow it, but more than that, we can kind of learn about it. Franchises are learning about it. It's not like the NBA, man. I don't know if you're a big hoops guy, but like mid-level exceptions, the different salary caps, the different layers to it. I mean, it is just so mid-level exceptions, like the NBA free agency and everything is just so over my head, where the way it's kind of going, like I said at the top, man, I'm very dumb. Like, I don't understand this stuff completely, but I understand how you can get money out of it. And I think that in itself is enough to kind of interest us as fans. Like, hey, like, let's see if we can kind of budget this ourselves.
Yeah, it's nice to see the way they manipulate and kind of try to do every little thing. I was going to joke that, in a few years, they're going to make these void years like illegal and somehow the Dolphins are going to get stripped of picks or something like that, right? But kudos to the Dolphins for utilizing that. I mean, didn't it just show up a few years ago and we're all like, oh, shit, this is a thing?
To wrap up here on Another Dolphins podcast, I just wanted to give Mick and Rigov here another shout out here, just because their comments were just giving us a shout out here. I mentioned it at the top. Our draft show with Catman was one of our biggest downloaded shows in like the last 3 months, and it's about the draft. It's the offseason. There are no games going on. The Dolphin fan base is very unique, and we're very grateful to be a part of it. Shout out Rigov for saying, surprised you guys aren't getting more views. Your content is good. Just want to take a minute here, 43 minutes into the show. If you haven't already, Spotify, iTunes, downloading the show on wherever you get your podcast helps us out so much, and it helps others find the show. So if you have a moment, can invest the time, we'd greatly appreciate it. And Mick Rack kind of talking about how we're in a unique scenario. We're on the 560 WQAM YouTube channel, and then you got to scroll a little bit, and then you got to click on podcasts, and then you'll see us in a little corner where he said you guys have a decent amount of subscribers, but not many likes. More likes for this channel viewers. These guys are real fans and experience the same madness we all do with the Dolphins, and they put it out there for all of us. More likes, it's just a click. Dude, Mick said it perfectly. Shout out Mick. And I do want to say, Josh, before I open up to you, my bad again. I should have rewritten a lot of these just to kind of make them a little more readable. Not that they weren't, but just when you're reading it out loud, it always sounds a little different. So hand up, my bad. I promise to be better next time.
I think I added one or two of those too, so I can take some responsibility for that. But these are awesome to hear, right? I mean, we hope that we put out good content. So if you like it, I mean, it means everything to sit there and smash that button and, tell your friends if they're Dolphin fans and they want to, follow along with our misery. We're always going to be here because, like Mick said, we're part of this madness. We're real fans and we're here till the end.
Beautifully said. And that is it. That is all the time we have today on Another Dolphins podcast. Thank you all so much for joining us. It broke 25 degrees here in the Northeast, so we have finally reached spring. I hope everyone down south is also enjoying the beautiful weather. But thank you all so much for listening to Another Dolphins podcast. We will be back later this week with another show. But until then, fins up.
Fins up.
Fins up.